and Tracy presenta el curso Fénix sobre la psicología del conocimiento.
Session 5, Taking Charge of Your Life.
We said in the first series of modules that the starting point of all peak performance is self-esteem. It's how much you like yourself, how much you love yourself, how much you accept yourself as a valuable and worthwhile human being. The second part of peak performance, I think the two key requirements, the second part is self-responsibility. Self-esteem plus self-responsibility, each reinforcing themselves. And what self-responsibility says simply is that you are the architect of your own destiny, that you are the master of your own fate, that you are totally self-responsible, that everything that you are or ever will be is up to you and you alone. Now, you can believe in a higher power, as I do, and you can say that the higher power is responsible, but God helps those who help themselves. And for this earthly life, you're in charge of your life. You're in charge of what happens to you. If you don't like the way things are going, it's up to you to change it. But there's no way that you can ever give away responsibility. And this whole subject of responsibility is one that is very controversial. And as you will see as we talk in this session, it's one that you have to understand with crystal clarity if you want to achieve your full potential as a human being. Now, we go over here. One of the things that we know is we start off as infants, if you like, when we're born. I'll just write I for infant. We start off as infants, and as we grow to become adults at the age of 18 years, we start off with zero responsibility. And as we grow toward becoming adults, we gain responsibility more and more, until by the time we become adults at the age of 18 years, if our parents have brought us up properly, if they have prepared us, if they've encouraged us to be self-reliant, if they've encouraged us to make our own decisions and think for ourselves and plan our own lives, at the age of 18 years, legally speaking, psychologically, morally, mentally, physically, and everything else, you are ready to take over your own life. Now, if your parents have not prepared you as an adult for total responsibility, it doesn't matter. At the age of 18, and from 18 onward, you are 100% responsible. For the rest of your life, you can never absolve yourself of responsibility. For the rest of your life, everything that happens to you is up to you, totally and without forgiveness. The slogan of the truly responsible person is, if it's to be, it's up to me. Which means, as Henry Ford said, never complain, never explain. Never complain, never explain. What that means is if you don't like the way things are, then it's up to you to change them. And if you're not willing to take steps to change them, then don't complain about them. Just simply accept them. Men who are men and women who are women don't complain about the difficulties of life. They just accept them as the difficulties of life, and they either do something about them or they don't say anything. So if it's to be, it's up to me. If it's to be, it's up to you. This is one of the hardest things to understand, because when we're children, at this stage, we're totally dependent. And being totally dependent, we develop, if you like, a habit pattern or a conditioned response, and we look for the reason that things happen outside of ourselves. As we become adults, if we're not careful, we will still retain this dependency, and we will long for what is called the pseudo-security of childhood. That time in childhood when someone took care of us. That time in childhood when we were fed and clothed and our home was taken care of and our school and everything. We didn't have to worry about a thing because they took care of it. As we grow up, we go off to school, and the people at school, they take care of things. And if we're not careful, we get into the work world, and then again it's they. It's always someone else outside of ourselves who is ultimately responsible for ourselves. One of the things which I'll talk about later is the whole idea of self-development. Most people, because they've been taken all their education in the public school system, think that it's up to them when they're adults to continue their education. If nobody comes along to continue it, they just simply don't do it. Now there's another point, and that's the difference between maturity and immaturity. And here's a very simple example. Imagine that this is the course of life, again from infancy to adulthood. And everybody reaches the stage, sooner or later, where they come to this great cliff and this great canyon. And this is the side of immaturity. This is the side of childhood. This is the side where we are dependent upon others and where we look to others for our answers and our solutions. We look outside of ourselves. At this point, we come to the edge of this canyon. At the edge of this canyon, we look across into the land of maturity, the land of adulthood. And each one of us has to make a decision to jump in one great leap from being a child to being an adult. Now, sometimes this is forced on us. Sometimes it happens in an evolutionary way. But sooner or later, we have to make the decision to accept the fact that we're in charge of our own lives, we're the architects of our own destinies, and then get on with it. What do most people do? Unfortunately, what most people do is they turn back at this point. They slip into marriages where somebody will take care of them. They take jobs where they expect their bosses to take care of them and so on. Or they just simply avoid responsibility by looking for the cause of everything that happens to them in other people and other circumstances. It's their bills, it's their health, it's the way their parents treated them and so on. They're not really responsible. On the other hand, sometimes they decide to take a little responsibility but not too much, which is the equivalent of trying to leap over a canyon in 2 jumps. And where the vast majority of people end up, unfortunately, is in the valley. And this is the valley of excuses. The great majority of people spend their whole life in the valley of excuses, making excuses rather than making progress. There's an old saying that says the disease of excusitis, which is the habit of making excuses to excuse away our failures and our inadequacies, is fatal to success. The habit of making excuses is fatal to your success. So the question you have to ask yourself when we talk about responsibility is, what excuses do you use not to move ahead? There was a very famous story by Tolstoy, where Tolstoy and his brothers would play, and they had a game. And the game was that out in the garden there would be a box. And in the box was the answer to all the riddles of life. And you could find the box under a certain bush as long as you didn't think about a big white rabbit. As long as you kept your mind clear of that big white rabbit and you didn't think about the rabbit, you could find the answer to all the mysteries of life. Well, of course, nobody ever found the box, or nobody ever found the answer to the mysteries of life, because they couldn't stop thinking of the big white rabbit. The question you have to ask yourself is, what is your big white rabbit? What is it that you think of? What is the excuse that looms into your mind whenever you think of something that you could do or have or be? A new job, a new challenge, an opportunity, changing something in your life that you're not happy with. What is the white rabbit? What is the excuse that pops into your mind? You say, well, I can't do that because. Or another thing is, yes, but. I'd like to, but. There's always a reason. I'm too young, I'm too old. I'm too tall, I'm too short. I don't have enough education, I've got too much education. It's the wrong time, it's the wrong place, and so on. What is your white rabbit? What is it that sticks in the back of your mind that causes you to make excuses, that causes you to hang back from taking responsibility, that keeps you in the land of childhood, immaturity, and irresponsibility? Very, very important question to ask. Now, when we talk about responsibility, we talk about something else. It's simply this, is that the acceptance of responsibility is not optional. Many of us like to think that, well, I'll take a little responsibility here, I'll take a little responsibility there. No, the acceptance of responsibility is not optional. From the time you become 18 years old, you are 100% responsible. You have no choice in the matter. As a matter of fact, there are very few things in life over which you have no choice, but you have no choice in this. It is mandatory. It is mandatory if you wish to fulfill your potential, if you wish to become everything you're capable of becoming, you must take full responsibility for bringing about the circumstances, for making the changes, for making the hard decisions necessary. If you take the word responsibility, you can break it into 2 words, response and ability. And one of the things which I've learned as I've studied history is that all of life is a series of challenges, difficulties, problems, setbacks, obstacles to face. And the difference between the winners and losers in life is not the difference in problems, because everybody has problems. And most people, and many people, have more and bigger problems than you or I could ever dream of. The difference in life, the difference between winners and losers, is the responses to the problems. Many years ago, a man named Oswald Spengler wrote a book in which he talked about what he called the challenge-response theory. The challenge-response theory simply said that civilizations grow and decline to the degree to which they meet challenges effectively and respond effectively. A small society starts out small, and almost invariably it will be challenged by either an external enemy or nature or weather or something else. If the society responds in a positive and constructive way to the challenge, the society grows. As it grows, it triggers additional challenges, difficulties. If it responds to them effectively, it grows some more. Oswald Spengler studied the 21 great empires of human civilization and found that every single one followed this cycle. As long as the civilization continued to rise to the challenge, it continued to grow stronger and stronger. The reason why this analogy is so important is that we as human beings are exactly the same. We grow to the degree to which we respond effectively, to the degree to which we rise to the challenges without making excuses that life throws at us. And when we look at the great men and women of history, whether it's Albert Schweitzer or Winston Churchill or George Washington or Abraham Lincoln or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we look at those great people, we find that they were always people that rose to the challenges of the time. If ever you wish to be capable of rising to great challenges, what you have to do is you have to start off on a daily basis rising to small challenges, which means no matter what happens, you accept the challenge, you accept the responsibility, you refuse to make excuses, and you go forward. Now, there's three areas in life, in our modern life, which you must be very, very aware of. The first area is the political area. If you look around you, you will find that there is a great drive toward the government doing it, the government being responsible. Make the government responsible. What people are doing is they want the government to be their parent. They want the government to protect them and take care of them. But as the more you vote for politicians to do things for you, the more you give politicians control. You see, you can never give away responsibility. You can only give away control. How do you give away control? You give away control in terms of voting for them to spend more of your money, regulate more of your businesses, tax away more of your income, and so on. The second area, so let me just finish this. The urge towards statism, collectivism, socialism, large government, and so on is all aimed at somehow making the government, that faceless bunch of bureaucrats, responsible for the challenges of our own lives. Now, the second area where this is prevalent is in the criminal justice system. In the criminal justice system, you will find that the one characteristic of all criminals is that they refuse to accept responsibility for their crime. It was always someone else or something else. It was always their childhood or the background or the other guys. That the way that people get out of the criminal justice system is they accept responsibility for the crimes they've committed. And they say, I did this. Nobody made me do it. I am responsible. And they stop going back to jail. The third area is in medicine. Today we know that almost all of our problems in medicine are psychological in origin, or we inflict things on ourselves. The average American or Canadian is about 10 to 20 pounds overweight. In medicine, we expect the doctor to be responsible. Just imagine how we would take, what kind of care you would take of yourself if you were on a desert island for life, with no doctors, no nurses, no hospitals, no medicine, no nothing, where you had nothing to fall back on. Very, very important point. So all around you in society, you're going to notice this clamor, this demand, I am not responsible. Make somebody else responsible. But this is the key. Remember, you are always free to choose. You are free to choose your responses. You are free to choose the quality of your emotional life. Do you know that you decide how you're going to feel by how you are going to respond? You decide when to get angry, when to be happy, when to be unhappy. You decide what your attitude is going to be when you get up in the morning. You decide the quality of your physical life. You're the one who decides what you eat, what you drink, what you don't eat and drink. You determine the quality of your financial life. You're the one who determines the quality and quantity of the work that you contribute. In every case, you're free to choose what you want. If you want things to be different, the starting point is to accept full, unqualified responsibility for your life. Well, I first discovered this whole concept of responsibility when I was 21 years old. I was living in a little apartment. I was working on a construction job. It was 35 degrees below zero outside. I didn't have a car. I didn't have any money in the bank. My clothes were old. I had failed out of high school. And I looked around me in that cold winter in that little apartment with no future and not much of a past. And I said to myself, if ever I want anything to change, it's up to me. That's the time where I really got scared. It suddenly hit me right between the eyes that if I wanted my life to be different, it was up to me to make my life different. And if I can get only one point across to you in this simple segment, this little segment, is that the starting point of flying to the stars, the starting point of taking complete charge of your life, the starting point of great success and great achievement is to accept complete, unconditional responsibility. If it's to be, it's up to me. If it's to be, it's up to you.
Session 6, Eliminating Negative Emotions.
Continuing on the subject of responsibility versus irresponsibility, many years ago, back in 1972, I began a study in an area of metaphysics that dealt with the psychology of the evolution of human potential. And one of the things that leaped out of those pages at me, and I've never really recovered from it, was the discussion of the connecting link between irresponsibility and negative emotions. And the fact that negative emotions are the great blocking emotions or crippling emotions of your life and my life. If the whole purpose of life, if you like, is to achieve higher levels of peace of mind, happiness, contentment, satisfaction, and so on, we have to sit down and we have to look and say, what stops us, or what is blocking us, or what gets in the way of us really enjoying our lives? And you find invariably it's negative emotions of some kind. Now, I'm not talking about the negative emotions that are associated with someone dying or with a great loss. I'm talking about the negative emotions that we experience on a day-to-day basis that rob us of peace of mind, rob us of health and energy, affect our loving relationships, get in the way of our financial independence, rob us of a feeling of fulfillment, and so on. So we're going to talk in this session about eliminating negative emotions, and I want to bring us back to this whole discussion of responsibility. This is one of the most important things that I've ever found in my life. It's simply this, is that if we take a graph or chart, and come with me for a second and let's chart this, and we take from the highest to the lowest, and up here we have a totally responsible person. This is a person who is completely self-assured, completely self-responsible, makes no excuses at all. And down here at the other end we have an irresponsible person, a person who makes excuses for everything. Now, this is the positive end of the scale, this is the negative end of the scale. Every one of us, you and I, are somewhere on this scale moving up or down with every decision that we take. Now, we found, and this is what got to me, and I said a little bit earlier, that there's a one-to-one relationship between how much you feel you are in control of your own life and how positive or how happy you are. Well, there's a one-to-one relationship between the amount of responsibility you accept and the amount of control you experience in your life. And there's a one-to-one relationship between the amount of responsibility and control you accept and the amount of freedom that you feel that you have. Freedom is the indispensable requirement for happiness. That true success, true happiness in life means being free to live your life your own way as you decide, without anybody else telling you what to do. Living your life as a bird, free as a bird, to do whatever you want. Well, there's a direct relationship between responsibility, control, and freedom, and there's a direct relationship between these three and positive emotions. Now, positive emotions are the great emotions. Positive emotions are those of happiness and love and joy and vitality and energy and exuberance and enthusiasm and excitement and so on. Now, down at the other end, however, we have an attitude of irresponsibility. And what does that lead to? This is what shocked me so much when I first learned it. It leads to a lack of control. Is that to the degree to which we are irresponsible, we lose control. Our inner selves disintegrate and fragment. It also leads to a lack of freedom because we no longer see ourselves as free agents choosing the direction of our own lives. We see ourselves as pawns, as victims, if you like, of external forces. And a lack of control and freedom leads to negative emotions. When I first began to understand this, I thought, well, yeah, but what about my parents? And what about my childhood? And what about my condition? I didn't have a very good job. And what about my friends? I had crummy friends. And what about my health? And what about the weather? And what about the economy? When I began to realize this, I began to realize that you put all that aside. If your highest aim, your highest goal is positive emotions of happiness, joy, freedom, enthusiasm, and so on, then you have to stop making excuses. Now, Carl Menninger, the great psychoanalyst, said a very interesting thing some years ago. He said that physical ailments are all different, caused by different bacteria, different viruses, and so on. He said, but mental illness is the same illness, simply spread along a spectrum from the least to the worst. And Thomas Szasz, the psychiatrist, said in his book, The Myth of Mental Illness, that there is no such thing as mental illness. There are merely varying degrees of irresponsibility. So when we say that an irresponsible person is not only negative, we say an irresponsible person is also mentally ill. A totally responsible person is mentally healthy. How does this affect you? Well, I know you want to advance as much as you can in life, or you wouldn't be going through the efforts of taking a program like this. There is a direct relationship between the amount of responsibility you accept for the results of your organization and the amount of power, influence, position, prestige, and status you will have in your work now and in the future. At the top of the graph of responsibility, we have people who accept total responsibility, and power and opportunity gravitates toward them. Down at the other end, we have no power or powerlessness, until you reach the extreme example of a person who's totally irresponsible, completely out of control, who has to be constrained in a straitjacket and locked up in a padded room for their own safety and for the safety of others. Completely powerless, completely without control or freedom. Now, every time we make a decision to be self-responsible, we move up on this graph. Every time we make a decision to make excuses, we move down on this graph. So let's take it a little bit further, and let's talk about the relationship between negative emotions and irresponsibility so that you understand it perfectly clearly. And a perfect example is this. Imagine here is a tree. All right? Here's a tree, and here is the bushes. This is what is called the negative emotion tree. In the negative emotion tree grows the predominant negative emotions: fear, doubt. Many people have considered that self-doubt is the most destructive of all negative emotion, holds you back more than you can imagine. Also, hate is a negative emotion. Then there's envy. There's resentment. And then, of course, there's resentment's sister, guilt. These are all the big negative emotions. These are the ones that have led the hit parade for years. There's about 54 different negative emotions, but these are the top one. And if you take these negative emotions and you boil them all down, and you can put in your own favorite, by the way. Everybody has their own favorite negative emotion. Jealousy could be yours. Self-pity is a good, strong one. It's doing well. But if you boil it down, you find that all negative emotions eventually boil down to anger. Either inwardly expressed, that is where you make yourself sick, or outwardly expressed, that is where you make other people sick. And this negative emotion tree, if we just take a look at its structure, we find the negative emotion tree has a root system. Now, the root system is where the nutrients come from that keep the negative emotion growing and keep the fruit of the negative emotion growing and blossoming. We look at the root system, we say, what are the nutrients? What keeps negative emotions going? What are the fertilizer? What is it that you heap on the fire, if you like, or put into the ground? And we find that there's two things essential to keep negative emotions alive. The first is justification. Justification. That's merely telling yourself and anybody else who will listen why you are justified in having this emotion. And the other is what we call identification. Identification means taking things personally. That's why, of course, they suggest that a person who acts as their own lawyer has a fool for a client. Probably a person who acts as their own doctor has a fool for a patient, too. Because we become so personally identified with our own situation, and so do you, we take it so personally that we get all emotionally involved and wrapped up in it. So we find that it's not possible for you to be negative about anything for very long unless you can justify or have a reason for it and explain it to other people, or unless you can identify and take it personally. For instance, if somebody comes in from the parking lot and says, they just ran into a car in the parking lot, doesn't bother you at all because you don't identify with it. Now, if they said they just ran into a car in the parking lot and it's your car in the parking lot and the person's gone, now you can become extremely upset. Remember this, however, that we always choose these responses. I'll come back to this in a second. So how do we get rid of justification? How do we starve the root system of the negative emotion tree? The way that we get rid of justification is by becoming non-judgmental. In the Bible it says, judge not that ye be not judged. And since the Bible is, amongst many other things, a book of philosophy and metaphysics and how to live, being non-judgmental means that you just refrain from judging. Hold back from judging. Instead of casting a judgment that somebody is guilty of something, somebody has done something, just remain open and neutral. Just remaining neutral, and that's the key, stops the negative emotion from getting going. One of the things that we know about negative emotions, and I've studied them for years, is that negative emotions start off like a spark. And as they are fed, as we dwell upon them, as we justify them, as we become judgmental about the situation, they start to grow and grow and grow until they absolutely consume our minds. Now, with regard to identification, which is taking things personally, what we do is what is called, we disidentify. we objectify, or we again remain neutral. We try to keep it at arm's length. We say there is a problem, but I am not the problem. There is a difficulty, but the difficulty is not me, and we keep it at arm's length. So these two, once we begin to stop justifying and stop identifying or taking things personally, stop getting emotionally involved. Have you ever had the situation where somebody comes to you with a problem and you get so emotionally involved with their problem that you start to feel upset, and they go away and they don't have a problem anymore, and you're still there and you're upset? This is because we've taken it so personally. However, the key to getting rid of negative emotions, and this is the most important part of this, is the trunk. It's cutting down the trunk of the negative emotion tree. And the trunk of the negative emotion tree is blame. Blame is 99% of negative emotions. Now, it's very important to understand where negative emotions come from. Negative emotions come from inside you. Negative emotions are not contained in external situations. Negative emotions are not caused by other people or other situations. Negative emotions are caused by your response to other situations. Perfect example. Two people meet the same situation, a traffic jam, a rude waiter, whatever it happens to be, and one person gets all upset and uptight and angry, the other person lets it go off their back. Another example, the same person, 2 different days. One day they've had an argument or a flat tire, or they're late for work, they get into a traffic jam and they're angry and they're uptight. The next day, they leave with plenty of time, they had a lovely breakfast with their family, they got lots of time to get to work, they have a traffic jam, it doesn't bother them at all. In both cases, it's an example of that the negative emotion does not come from the situation. Is that you are always free to choose the quality of your emotional life. Is that you choose to become angry. Now understand this, nobody makes you feel anything. Nobody makes you feel angry. Nobody makes you feel tense. Nobody makes you feel upset. You always decide how you're going to feel, and then if you're not careful, you will fall into a negative habit pattern of blaming the other person. Blame is the core of all negative emotions. When you stop blaming, you cut down the negative emotion tree. You cut it off, you kill it, and all the negative emotions die simultaneously. It's almost exactly as if this negative emotion tree were a Christmas tree and it were plugged into the wall. And the negative emotions were Christmas tree lights. And you took this plug and you jerked it out of the wall, what would happen? Well, what would happen is that all the negative emotions, the lights, would go out simultaneously, just like that. How do you do this? You do this by using the law of substitution. Remember, the law of substitution says that the conscious mind can only hold one thought at a time. It's the thought that the conscious mind holds that determines how the emotions will react, how the subconscious mind will react. Since it can only hold one thought at a time, what you do is you knock out the thought that is causing the negative emotion, the blame thought, and you replace it with this affirmation. I am responsible. I am responsible. I am responsible. This, in conjunction with I like myself, I am responsible, is the most powerful, positive affirmation you can use, because the instant that you say I am responsible, you exert complete control over your emotional life. The instant you say I am responsible, suddenly you are back in the driver's seat. You cannot say I am responsible and feel a negative emotion simultaneously. The one knocks the other one out of your conscious mind. And you can start off now. For instance, each one of us has a situation that causes us a lot of aggravation. You have a situation, it may be a person, but every time you think about it, you get angry. Every time you think about it, you get cross or you get distracted. What you do is whenever you start to think about that situation, neutralize it by saying, I am responsible. Wait a minute, I am responsible. Is it a relationship? Who got yourself into the relationship? Did somebody put you there at gunpoint, or did you get into it by yourself? Is it a job? Is it an investment? Is it a health problem of some kind? In every case, accept responsibility. Now, there's a big difference between acceptance and responsibility, and let me just write this up. It's responsibility versus blame. Responsibility versus blame. What is blame? Blame always looks backward toward the past. Blame looks toward the past, toward what cannot be done, toward what can't be changed. Responsibility always looks to the future. So people say, well, when you accept responsibility, isn't it the same as saying you're to blame? No. It's the same as saying that you are in charge of the quality of your thinking from this moment onward. So let us say that you come out to the parking lot and somebody's run into your car. Now, you have two choices. You can become angry and upset and run around and scream and shout, or you can act in a responsible manner. You can do everything possible to trace the culprit, and other than that, you can live with it maturely. So responsibility always looks to the future. Responsibility always asks this question when faced with a problem. What can we do? Not who did it, but what can we do from here? Where do we go from here? What can we do? This is the question of the responsible person. We don't cry over spilt milk. We just say, all right, what's the solution? And we get on with the game. The irresponsible person always says, who did it? And is obsessed with finding out who did it and then taking whatever blame there is and apportioning it so that everybody gets their fair share of the blame, which of course does nothing to resolve the difficulty. So the key to cutting down the negative emotion tree is using the axe and eliminating blaming. The day that you begin to eliminate blaming from your life is the day that your life starts to take off. Because the day that you start to eliminate blaming and negative emotions, suddenly most of the problems, most of the things that stand between you and the happiness you desire vanish. Why am I making such an emphasis on negative emotions? Well, let me make that clear for just a second. What I found, and this is what was staggering to me, because I've always been committed to realizing my potential as a human being, is that you cannot advance in life except to the degree to which you get rid of your negative emotions. You cannot make any progress. You cannot go any further than where you are right this minute except to the degree to which you leave your negative emotions behind. Now, by the way, with regard to the negative emotion that you have that's associated with another person or situation, it's difficult to accept responsibility. It's difficult to say, I am responsible initially, because you've been blaming that person for so long. So sometimes you have to say it with gritted teeth. You have to say, wait a minute, I am responsible. I am responsible. But the more you repeat this, I am responsible, I am responsible, I am responsible, it comes easier and easier. Eventually it gets to the point where as soon as you think of that person or situation, you can neutralize the thought by the law of substitution by saying, wait a minute, I am responsible. I am responsible. There's a beautiful line that you can use also in dealing with difficult people. That goes back to self-esteem, and it also has to do with eliminating negative emotions, is say something like this: no matter what you say or do, I'm still a valuable and worthwhile person. Or, no matter what happens, I am still a valuable and worthwhile person. Or, no matter how this situation turns out, I am still a valuable and worthwhile person. The natural course of life is this. Here's the road of life. And when we're children, we start off with no negative emotions. All negative emotions, by the way, have to be taught to a child. They have to be taught, and the child has to learn them from their parents. Have you ever seen a negative baby? There's no such thing as a negative baby. Babies just laugh, and they're happy, and they cry when they have needs, but babies are not negative. But as we grow up, we watch the people around us, and we begin to develop our own negative emotions, which we carry in a sack on our back. As we become teenagers, this sack grows big enough to the point where we can even go to slumber parties, or we can get together with our buddies and we can talk about how terrible our childhood has been, how rotten our parents are, how rotten our siblings, teachers, and everything else are. Now when we become adults, what is the mark of adulthood in our society? The mark of adulthood is that you have a great gunny sack full of negative emotions because you have suffered. And what happens is you spend most of your time when you're with other people letting down your guards and telling them about how much you've suffered. What you do is you use exchanges of negative emotions as the basis for your relationships. You say, look, I'll show you my negative emotions if you'll show me yours. Remember, like we used to do as kids? And what you do is you get together like a couple of traders in an Arab bazaar, and you display your negative emotions. You say, oh, look at this rotten childhood I had, and look at this terrible relationship, and look at how crummy my boss is, and how rotten this is, and so on. And you exchange them back and forth. Now, what happens when you talk about and think about your negative emotions? Remember the law of concentration? Whatever you dwell upon grows. Whatever you dwell upon grows and gains strength and stays alive. Negative emotions, by the way, and this is another thing that I learned in the study, is negative emotions are very fragile and ephemeral things. Is that if you don't keep them alive through constant talking, through constant cultivation, you know what happens? They die on you. Yes. You see, negative emotions just die. It's like a fire. If it falls where there's nothing, or a spark, if it falls where there's nothing to burn, it goes out. Negative emotions, unless you talk about them and keep them going, unless you dwell on them all the time, they die on you. You ever had an experience where you're really worried about something, you're really upset about something, and it's preoccupying all of your time, and And then you get to work or you get home and you get so busy doing something else that for about 3 or 4 hours you don't have time to think of anything else. And about 3 or 4 hours you stop and say, geez, I haven't worried about that for a long time. I've got to get back to worrying about it because what's happening is going out. It's like a fire that's going out. So you've got to get back to it. You've got to think about it and talk about it and worry about it and hassle it to get it back up to the point where it's preoccupying your whole mind. How many times does that happen? Well, what the mature adult does is the mature adult leaves their negative emotions by the side of the road and gets on with the rest of their life. They get on with the rest of their lives. They leave them there instead of dragging them along. They leave them like a big pile of garbage at a garbage strike. They just leave it there. And when people say, how are things going? You say, wonderful. You say, how's life? You say, terrific. You say, how's your relationships? Couldn't be better. How is your health? How are you feeling? I feel great. In other words, don't talk about negative things, because when you talk about negative things, you actually increase them and you draw more of them into your life. Look at the people that you know who have problems. You notice the people that you know who have problems all the time, never seem to solve their problems, are people who talk about their problems all the time. To him that hath shall more be given. From him who hath not, even that which he hath shall be taken away. Now, this is another critical point with regard to relationships. And I learned this again in my studies. It is that each of us has a certain amount of suffering that we've gone through, and people fall in love with their suffering. People love their suffering. As a matter of fact, they feel that they've paid for it, they've thought about it, they've lived with it for so long that most people are very reluctant to give up their suffering. You can't talk them out of it. You say, well, why don't you just forget it? Why don't you just put it behind you? Why don't you just get on with it? They say, well, I can't do that. Do you know how much I've suffered? Do you know how much emotional investment I've put into this relationship, this job, this career, and so on? I remember, I can tell you 1,000 people who have come up to me who are in bad relationships. And they say, well, I've been in this relationship or in this marriage now for several years, and I'm miserable, I'm unhappy, we don't like each other, it's going nowhere. I say, why don't you do something about it? But after all these years? And what I say to them is, I say, look, the average life expectancy of the average American today is between 75 and 80 years. And it's going up. By the time we reach the end of the century, the average life expectancy will probably be 80, 85, 90 years old. Do you know what that means? That whatever age you are now, and you may be 20, 25, 30, 35, it doesn't really matter, you subtract that from 80, you get the number of years that you've got left to live in this current situation. You ask yourself, do you want to live in this situation for the next 30, 40, 50 years? And the answer, in all honesty, has to be no, because it's probably not going to get any better. People love their suffering. They hate to give up their suffering. So what we've devised is a very simple bit of advice. And this advice, I just recently discussed this with a consulting psychologist, and he said it's the simplest advice he's ever heard to give to people who need it. It's when somebody comes up to you and wants to talk to you about their problems. You say yes, and you be sympathetic and empathetic. It's very good to hear people and let them talk out their problems, except there are some people who do nothing but talk about their problems. Every time you see them, they talk about their problems. Very often, they talk about the same things they talked about last time. What you do is you say, yes, I hear what you say, and I'm very sympathetic. However, you're responsible for your own life. You are responsible. What are you going to do about it? You are responsible for your own life. What are you going to do about it? Now, what will happen is this, is that your good friends will say, yes, you're right, I am responsible. I have to make a change. I have to do something about it. And they'll go out and they'll do it. As a matter of fact, they'll come and they'll lay out all their problems to you, and all you say to them is this. You say, well, what do you think you should do about it? Now, your good friends can use that conversational time to get their own thoughts in line, to come up with their own conclusions and go out, and they don't need your advice. Most people don't need advice. There's an old saying that says that don't worry about the universal propensity to give advice, because the propensity to ignore it is equally universal. People don't need advice sometimes, they just need a sounding board. However, there are some people who don't have any intentions of doing anything about their problems. All they want to do is they want to use their problems as an excuse to get you to talk about them. You understand that? The very common neurotic tendency in our society is to use your problems as the basis for the discussion. Here's my problems, let's you and me talk about them. And the person in himself or herself has no interest in you at all. All they have an interest in is having you listen. As a matter of fact, we say this as a joke. We say that this is what these people look like. Is these people look upon you as being a person, and this is your face, and this is your eyes, and these are your ears. See? And here is your eyes, preferably wide open and sympathetic. Here's your mouth, preferably shut. And here's your ears, preferably wide open. These people don't even look upon you as a person. They don't care about your problems at all. All they care about is you sitting there listening and nodding sympathetically and giving them advice which they have no intention whatever of following. When you run into people like this, it's a very simple way to test the friendship. Just start talking about yourself. Say, well, you know, I'm really glad you brought your problems to me because I've got some problems of my own, and I'd like to discuss my life with you. You will find these people will run for the door. They'll watch their watch. They've got an appointment. They'll take off so fast you can't imagine. All right, now one final point, and this is critical. It's absolutely critical to the whole subject. It's the wrap-up point, if you like. It's this, is that when we start talking about giving up negative emotions, almost everybody says, yes, I agree. What you say is true. It makes sense to me, Brian, and I am going to give up my negative emotions. I am going to accept responsibility. I am going to take charge of my life, and I'm not going to blame anybody else anymore. Except for one. Everybody has one that they're not going to part with. Everybody has that favorite negative emotion that they've been paying for and holding on to for years. Now, let me tell you why it's so important that you give it up. Here's a car. Imagine it's a beautiful Mercedes automobile. Brand new from the factory. Absolutely spitting 560 SEL, $55,000, beautiful vehicle. Tested in every aspect. Absolutely perfect. It's given to you without a flaw. Except for one. This is the front of the automobile, and there's one small problem. Is that for some mechanical reason, this brake is locked on. Now you get into this beautiful Mercedes, just as you are. Beautiful mind, beautiful body, beautiful potential, incredible capability. You get into this beautiful Mercedes and you start it up and you step on the gas. And what happens? Well, if the front brake is locked on, what will happen to the car? No matter how hard you step on the gas, what will happen to the car? What will happen is that the car will spin. It'll go around in circles. It'll spin and it will go around in circles until you stop stepping on the gas and you give up. As long as that front brake is locked on, you can't go anywhere. What I found was this, is that the existence of just one negative emotion that you will not let go of for whatever reason, and the reason is always an ego reason, the reason is always has to do with your own ego, will cause you to stay in the same place and spin your wheels and go in circles for the rest of your life. That you all know people who are talented, who have opportunities, good educations, and so on and so forth, and their life just goes around in circles. They just seem to be spinning. They've got everything going for them, and they just continually have problems. Why is it? Almost invariably, and this is what all psychoanalysis does, all psychotherapy, is they've got one negative emotion locked on, and the negative emotion they have locked on is blame. There is somebody that they are still blaming for something. There's somebody that they are not going to let off the hook because that son of a gun did something to them. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about, because we're all in the same boat. We're all human beings. The reason this makes sense to you and I is because we do have a tendency to fall in love with our suffering. We do have a tendency to gunny sack and to think that part of our humanity is all these negative emotions. We do have a tendency to see that other people are responsible. Other people have hurt us. They did cost us money. They did hurt us in a relationship. But the key to peak performance, the key to happiness, the key to success is to use the law of substitution and knock those negative emotions out of the box. By the very first time you think of anything that causes you any stress, you say, I am responsible. Wait a minute, I am responsible. I am responsible. I am responsible. I like myself and I am responsible. I like myself and I am responsible. And nothing outside of me is going to disrupt my peace of mind. I am in charge of my emotional life. I am responsible. You are responsible.
Session 7, Releasing Your Brakes.
When I began studying negative emotions many years ago, the most critical point I discovered was that you cannot make any progress toward health, happiness, love, and fulfillment of your potential as long as you insist on keeping your negative emotions intact. Now, the only good thing about negative emotions, if there is any good thing at all, is that negative emotions are not permanent. Even according to Sigmund Freud, there is no permanent place for negative emotions in the subconscious. In other words, they are unwanted visitors. They are negative habits or negative response patterns that can be eliminated. And the starting point of eliminating them is understanding where they came from. Understanding what were the causative factors going back to early childhood that have triggered the development of negative emotions and have given us as adults a propensity to be negative in one way or another. That takes us to early childhood conditioning. Remember we said before that the starting point of inhibitive and compulsive negative habit patterns was destructive criticism. Destructive criticism is the great destroyer. Destructive criticism destroys people on the inside and leaves them walking around on the outside. More personalities have been undermined and destroyed. More self-esteem has been cast aside as a result of destructive criticism than anything else that we can possibly imagine. So destructive criticism is the great killer. Now, why is it so bad? Well, we know that children as infants, children as they're growing up, have a tremendous need for love and approval from their parents. In fact, many psychiatrists and psychologists have said that the number one reason for mental illness in adulthood is withdrawal of love, or love withheld. We know that any prestigious person, any person who is important to a child, has an inordinate impact on that child, and that children up to the age of 6 years have very little ability to discriminate between valid and invalid criticism. What this means is that anything that a parent or an older sibling or an older relative, anything that a prestigious person or important person says to a child is accepted as true. It's accepted as a valid representation of reality. If a mother says you're a bad boy, if daddy says you're lazy, if someone says that you're not dependable, if someone says you're stupid or you're clumsy or you're ugly, the child has no capacity whatever to discriminate between valid and invalid. The child accepts that as a true representation of reality. It bypasses the conscious mind, goes straight into the subconscious, and is stored. Many of us, as adults, are still living on the basis of negative information that was programmed into us when we were children. And then as adults, what do we say? We say, well, that's just the way I am. Or, I've always been that way. Or some people even say, well, it runs in the family. Your father was like that, children are like that. Or your mother was like that, and so on. But where did it come from? None of these things run in the family. For instance, when I was growing up, my parents had gone through the Depression. And the Depression had made an inordinate impact on them. So whenever we talked about buying anything, all the time I was growing up, my parents would become very, very tense, and they said, we can't afford it. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. We can't afford it. They had this lack mentality, this we can't afford it mentality all their lives. And I grew up, so even though I've never experienced the Depression, and you've never experienced the Depression in most cases, 10, 20, 30, 40 years later, we're still saying, I can't afford it. I can't afford it. I can't afford it. We're still going on the basis of those critical remarks, those emotionalized remarks that our parents said. Maybe your parents said, as my father told me over and over again, you never finish anything you start. You never finish anything you start. You never finish anything you start. Or you're lazy. You never finish anything you start. Do you know, when I was an adult, I had a terrible time finishing things that I started. As I would get close to the end of a task, I would actually begin to seize up and look for every single excuse to procrastinate and delay. Now, the second factor that predisposes us to negative emotions is lack of love. We know that children's personalities develop to the degree to which they receive a high quality and a high quantity of love from their parents. There's a one-to-one relationship between the amount of love, the quality and quantity of love, and healthy personality. That love withdrawn or deprivation of love is the key cause of unhappiness, negativity, and mental illness in adulthood. Now, in order for a child to feel truly loved, the child must have high self-concept parents, and most of us, unfortunately, had parents that were the victims of their parents and the victims of their parents. What one of the writers says, everybody is a victim of a victim. We are all victims of victims. In other words, parents meant to raise us the best way they could, but they were victims of victims themselves. Now, in order for a child to feel fully loved, 3 conditions have to exist. Number 1 condition is that parents must love themselves. Parents must love themselves. Remember, you can never give any more love to others than you have for yourself. If you don't love yourself, you can't love your children. If you have a little bit of love for yourself, you have to spread it over your children. If you have a little bit of love for yourself and that's all taken up by your husband or your wife, then sometimes, even though you want to love your children, you don't have the love. Even if your parents wanted to love you, in many cases they didn't have the love to give. Why? It's because they never got it when they were growing up. The second requirement is that parents must love each other. In order for a child to grow up feeling self-confident, to grow up feeling loved, to grow up feeling safe and secure, he or she must grow up in an environment where the parents love each other. There is nothing that is more frightening to a child than to grow up in a household where the parents are fighting with each other, where the parents don't love each other, where there's difficulty, because the child always has a tendency, first of all, to be a victim, in that the child is shouted at and screamed at, and the child believes that the reason my mommy and daddy are fighting is it's my fault. Now, interesting research. Since there are so many single-parent families today, interesting research shows that when one of the parents leaves as a result of a separation or a divorce, the remaining child or children are invariably convinced that the reason the other parent left was because of something they did. And it's critical, if a marriage or a relationship is going to end and one is going to leave, that the remaining parent tell the children over and over again that the reason the relationship didn't work out has nothing to do with you. It has only to do with me and daddy or me and mommy. It has nothing to do with the child. The child needs to hear it many, many times before the child feels confident and secure. And of course, it's always better that a child be raised in a home with one parent that loves them rather than two parents that don't love each other. Now, the third condition that must be fulfilled if lack of love is not to exist is that parents must love the child. Parents must love the child. Well, this seems pretty obvious. I mean, it's pretty logical. The fact of the matter is, though, and this is the hardest thing for you or I as adults even to think about, but it is possible that our parents didn't love us. Not that they didn't intend to. I mean, they meant to love us, and they wanted to love us, and they had us intending to love us, and so on, but simply because they had conflicts with each other, and they had unresolved problems with their parents, and they had the war and the depression, and they had their careers, and they had other responsibilities, they just never got around to it. You see, that was the difficulty. They meant to, but they never got around to it. The only way that you can really love a child is by spending a high quantity and high quality of time with the child. High quantity, high quality with the child. 10 minutes a day doesn't do it. Children consider themselves valuable to the degree to which the most important people in their lives spend time with them. If the most important people in their lives, their parents, only spend a little time with them, the children conclude that the reason for that is because they are defective. There is something essentially wrong with them, and that's why their parents don't spend time with them. The children don't think rationally, they think purely emotionally. They only think if the parent is here, he loves me or she loves me. If the parent doesn't spend time with me, he or she doesn't love me. So if any one of those three conditions or more existed when you were growing up, the parents didn't love themselves, the parents didn't love each other, or maybe the parents didn't love you because they never got around to it, although they meant to, then you will have grown up in conjunction with destructive criticism with what is called guilt. Now, what is guilt? Well, guilt is a feeling of not being worth very much. Where do we get this feeling? Well, when we're continually criticized by the important people in our lives, and simultaneously we are not given the amount of love that we need, we feel that we're not worth very much. We feel that we are worth less. And a feeling of guilt leads to a feeling of worthlessness. Worthlessness. And guilt, the feeling of worthlessness, is the underlying fundamental problem of the 20th century. It is the main source of mental illness. It is the main source of problems in relationships. It's the main source of psychosomatic illness. It is the main source of most of the problems that beset our society, is this deep down feeling of guilt and worthlessness, which is expressed or unexpressed in the thought or the attitude, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. You know, we talked about self-esteem and how important it was. Self-esteem means I like myself. I like myself. I like myself. I like myself. People who've been raised with destructive criticism and lack of life not only don't like themselves, they don't feel that they're good enough for anybody or anything, and in many cases they are plagued by self-hatred. They hate themselves. Self-hatred or self-condemnation. And you will see this will come out in their conversation, and it will come out in their relationships with other people. People who hate themselves, even though they want to have good relationships with other people, are simply not capable of it. People who don't feel that they're good enough for anything will always bring it to the surface. It will always be a problem. Now, what are the main reasons for guilt? Actually, where does guilt come from? Guilt comes from three negative sources: negative parents, negative influences, or negative religion. One of the three. Any one of the three uses guilt, and guilt is used or practiced, especially by parents and by some religious denominations, for two reasons. One is punishment. Guilt is used to punish us. When we're growing up, it's the easiest way to punish a person is to make them feel bad. So our parents make us feel bad by physically punishing us or by verbally abusing us. And punishment is a very good way to gain conformance. Punishment is a very good way to get people to do what you want. The second reason why guilt is used when it's consciously practiced, and some organizations practice it consciously, is for control. Emotional control especially, because if you can emotionally control a person with guilt, you can manipulate their behavior. And there are many organizations that use guilt as a tool of control and manipulation. If you can control people strongly enough, especially emotionally, you can get their money, you can get their time, you can get their commitment, you can demand their resources, and so on. And many organizations use punishment, use guilt as a tool for doing this. Many of the charities that advertise on television, especially charities for very needy causes involving children or disabled people, use the feeling of guilt. You're doing so well, you should feel guilty for these people who are suffering. Therefore, send us some money, and that will take care of your guilt for a little while, until we get you on our mailing list, and so on. So guilt is a standard. Why is it that guilt is so commonly used? Well, first of all, because almost all of us have it to a greater or lesser degree. And number two, it's easy. Guilt is the easiest. Why do our parents use guilt on us? Why do our mothers use guilt on us? Because a mother can control us with guilt across a crowded room. She can control us over 1,000 miles of telephone line. Parents can use guilt on their children because their parents use guilt on them, when their parents use guilt on them, because it's the easiest. There's no physical effort. You can do it with a look, a glance, and a word. And people always do the easiest thing, as you know. So be alert to it. Now, if you've been brought up in an environment where you've been made to feel guilty, and almost all of us have, you must understand that guilt is like a cesspool of negative emotional bacteria that sits at the core or the root of your psyche or your subconscious, and it springs forth all other negative emotions: anger, hatred, envy, resentment, frustration, and doubt and fear, and so on and so forth. It controls, it creates them all. And the way to really get rid of that core is to excise it and cut it out completely. So that's what we're going to do in the rest of this session. First of all, how can you tell if you have been brought up with feelings of guilt? All right, we'll call this the adult manifestations of guilt. Adult manifestations of guilt. You can tell, and you can just test yourself, how many of these do you have? Number one, adult manifestation of guilt, is you have feelings of inferiority. Feelings of inferiority, feelings of inadequacy, and feelings of undeservingness. In other words, you don't feel that you deserve good things to happen to you. If a person has been brought up with destructive criticism, made to feel guilty, then when they do succeed, even with tremendous effort later on in life, they have a terrible tendency to feel that they don't deserve it. This is called, by the way, fear of success. Fear of success is just another way of saying that a person who has been conditioned to believe themselves to be unworthy or not good enough feels very uncomfortable when they experience success. They feel very tense and uneasy. As a matter of fact, if they feel too much tension, they'll start snorting coke, drinking too much alcohol, they'll engage in self-destructive behaviors, they'll have a tremendous, overwhelming feeling of anxiety, like somebody's going to find them out. There's a book on the bookstands that says, if I'm doing so well, how come I feel like an imposter? They have what is called the imposter syndrome. Have you ever been successful at something and people come up to you and say, boy, you did a great job at that, or that's wonderful, even if you had worked hard at it, and you felt like they were going to find you out? You felt like, they would find out that you weren't really that good, that it was just a fluke, it was just an accident. And of course, that's what people say. They say it was just a fluke. It was just an accident. I don't know how it happened. I'll blow it next time. They do everything possible to get away from this feeling of inferiority and undeservingness. So be alert to that. Now, the second adult manifestation of guilt is destructive self-criticism. There is a line from one of the poets that says, those to whom evil is done do evil in return. Children at a very early age, sometimes at the age of 2 or 3, begin to run themselves down, tear themselves down, even to hit themselves and physically punish themselves if they're criticized enough. They're always saying the equivalent of, I'm not good enough, or I'm not very good. And they punish themselves. So destructive self-criticism is a real symptom of an underlying feeling of guilt and inadequacy. Number 3 is easily manipulated by guilt. People can pull your guilt strings. Very simple. As a matter of fact, we find that there are 2 types of people in the world. There's guilt throwers and there's guilt catchers. And these people are invariably attracted to each other. And of course, the guilt thrower is the person who identified with a parent who threw the guilt. The guilt catcher is the person who identified with a parent who caught the guilt. But the guilt throwers and the guilt catchers then get together. They balance nicely. They settle down. They raise new generations of little guilt throwers and guilt catchers. But you can tell that you're easily manipulated by guilt. Because you've been conditioned to be responded to. Your boss can pull your guilt string. A person on a bus can pull your guilt string. The airline flight attendant can pull your guilt string. Be very, very alert to this. The 3rd manifestation, or the 4th manifestation of guilt, is that you use it. You use guilt and blame generously. Why? Well, it's been worked on you, you work it on them. I mean, if exchange is a fair deal. You use guilt and blame generously. It becomes the basis of your relationships with other people. Is when something goes wrong, you pin the rap on them. Something goes wrong, you blame someone. Instantly there's a problem, you look around to see who's to blame. They did an interesting experiment in Candid Camera a few years ago where they took and they put a patch of ice on a sidewalk where it shouldn't be. It wasn't that cold, but they froze the ice. And then they watched how people would react as they walked along. And they'd be walking along, and they'd hit this patch of ice in it, and they'd grab their balance, and they'd turn around. The first thing they'd do is they'd look at the person closest to them, and they'd glare at them as if they're furious. In other words, they looked at somebody to blame. Now, if there wasn't anybody within 10 or 15 feet, they would get their balance back again. They'd look around. There'd be nobody around them, and they'd kick the ground and stomp on the ground and walk away. You see, our natural tendency whenever anything goes wrong is to look for someone or something to blame, especially if we've been brought up being blamed continuously. And the 5th manifestation is what is called victim language. Now, remember we talked about the law of concentration. It says whatever you dwell upon grows. It also says that if you use victim language, you keep the guilt alive. You reinforce it, you build it, you grow it, you fertilize it. Victim language is language like, I can't, I can't, I can't. Whenever you say, I can't, I can't, I can't, you're sending a message to the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind picks up that you are helpless, that you're not in control, that you're a victim. And so when you actually come to want to do something, the subconscious mind just feeds back your own command and says, you can't, you can't. The second thing is you say, I have to, I have to. Again, I have no control, I'm not in charge. But here's 2 other expressions of victim language that you've got to be careful of. And it's this one. I'll try. I'll try. Whatever it is, I'll try. What does the words I'll try mean? Well, let me tell you what they mean. They mean I'm going to fail, and I'm telling you in advance so that you can't come back on me. In other words, you say, well, I'll try to be there on time. But what you're saying is I'll probably be late, and there's no point. You can't come back on me because I said I'd try. Whenever a person says, I'll try, they are excusing failure in advance. If you went to the doctor and the doctor did an examination and checked you all over and looked at you and came back and said, well, geez, you're in terrible condition. We're going to have to do triple bypass surgery and get you over to the hospital right now. I'm surprised you even made it in. And you say, well, geez, doctor, I sure hope you'll do a good job. And he says, I'll try. And he says, I'll try. He said, wait a second. Maybe I got to get a second opinion. You go to a lawyer. You're charged with something. You go to a lawyer and you present your case to the lawyer and say, look, will you defend me? He says, I'll try. What is he saying? He's saying, look, I've looked at the case, and from what I see, there's not much hope, but I'll take it on anyway. I'll try. And they're the ones that try to get you to pay in advance, too. Another set of words that you mustn't use. By the way, with regard to I'll try, what you do is you say, I'll do it or I won't do it. Not I'll try. If ever, in our business, we run a very, very active business. Whenever we call somebody up and we ask them, can we get this or that? They say, well, I'll try to have it to you by Friday, or I'll try to get it done on time. We instantly know that they're telling us that they want off the hook, they're not going to do it. And so we never let anybody get away with I'll try. We say it has to be done or not, and we want a guarantee. And if necessary, we'll go and pick it up. But whenever they say I'll try, what they're doing is they're sloughing you off. So be alert to that. And the other words are I wish. A wish, as they say, is a desire or a goal with no energy behind it. I wish. What does I wish mean? I wish means that I would like to have something, but I know I never can. When you say, I wish I could lose weight, what does it mean? The unspoken words are, but I know I can't. Why can't you? Because of the excuses that you have and the metabolism that you have and the problems and so on. There's always reasons because you have to go out and so on. I wish I could quit smoking. I wish I could get fit. I wish, I wish, I wish. Whenever you use the words I wish, you signal to the subconscious that this is something that you do not believe it's possible for you to achieve or acquire. The subconscious then completely discards it as a goal and gives you no energy, no motivation, no drive, no desire to accomplish it. So be very, very alert to victim language. Be alert to the expression, yes, but. Oh, I do it, yes, but. Oh, someone says, why don't you do this? You say, yes, but. The word but, by the way, is the great eraser. When a person says, you could certainly increase your income or increase your output or be a better person or happier or lose weight or whatever else it happened to be, and you say, yes, but, what you're saying is you're erasing the whole statement that has gone before. You send a message to your subconscious that says, no possibility, make no effort, focus no energy, commit no capacity to the accomplishment of this goal. So people who've been brought up feeling guilty have 5 qualities or 5 adult manifestations. One is they feel inferior, they feel inadequate, they feel like they don't deserve good things to happen to them. You're very alert to that. Number 2 is they run themselves down continually. They use destructive self-criticism. Number 3 is they use guilt and blame on themselves and on others. Number 4 is they're easily manipulated by guilt. Number 5, they use victim language. So let's go and say, how do we get rid of guilt? Isn't it amazing how this board just clears? Isn't that amazing? It's absolutely vanishing. We have a sort of a magic wand that we wave when I go over and sit on that desk. Okay, how do we rid ourselves of guilt? Ridding yourself of guilt. Here's the process. It's got a few really critical steps. Number 1, top of the list, eliminate destructive self-criticism. Eliminate destructive self-criticism. In other words, never say anything destructively critical about yourself. Just don't say it. Here's the basic rule. Since your subconscious accepts whatever you say as true, as being a command, what you do is you don't say anything about yourself that you do not sincerely desire to be true. Don't say, I'm fat, I'm tired. Don't say, I can't, or I have to. Don't say anything unless you want it to be true. Remember, the words that come after the word I are the words that your subconscious records as commands, except for when you say, I wish or I'll try. So eliminate destructive self-criticism. Only speak in positive terms about yourself. I like myself. I like myself. I can do it. I will do it. I choose to do it. But not I can't or so on. Number 2 is refuse to be manipulated by guilt. Refuse to be manipulated by guilt. Because every time you allow somebody to manipulate you by guilt, you know what happens? You reinforce and make stronger the effect or the influence of guilt in your life. Now, when I grew up in a family that was greatly influenced by negative religion. As a matter of fact, my mother, God bless her, had a black belt in guilt, and she did a superb job on it. And it took me years to get over it. When I got married to Barbara, she'd also come from the same sort of family. So we have to come back, and we have a beautiful response. Whenever the other of us falls back into old patterns, we say, you're not trying to make me feel guilty, are you? You're not trying to make me feel guilty, are you? That's a beautiful way to do it. Just say, you're not trying to make me feel guilty, are you? And refuse to let people manipulate you using guilt. Number 3 is refuse to use guilt and blame. And announce that you're not going to use it. Refuse to use it on other people. And let your children and let your spouse say the same thing. You're not trying to make me feel guilty, are you? And just keep repeating it over and over again. And say, well, and sometimes they say, yes, I am. You say, well, it's not going to work. It's not going to work anymore. You see, guilt only works as long as you don't know that it's being used on you. Number 4 is what we call the law of forgiveness. This is the most important of all. It's really the core, it's the guts of this whole session. The law of forgiveness simply says that you are mentally healthy to the degree to which you can freely forgive and forget grievances against you. That your ability to forgive others is the key determinant of your happiness and success in life. Your ability to forgive others is the key way to eliminate guilt. Your willingness to forgive others and to let go past grievances is the single most important determinant of whether or not you are a fully integrated, fully functioning adult human being. Because the tendency to blame and to hold grudges is a childlike, pathological tendency that is possessed by all people who are mentally ill. The ability to let go of grudges, to forgive freely, is the mark of the truly enlightened human being. Now, if you accept that as true, there's 4 people that you have to forgive. Number 1 is forgive your parents. Forgive your parents for everything that they've ever done that hurt you. Most of our research shows that almost all of our adult problems trace back to being unwilling or unable to forgive our parents for something that they did that hurt us. Forgive them 100%. Write to them, telephone them, tell them, or at the very least, forgive them in your heart, but forgive your parents. Number 2 is forgive others. Forgive everyone else. Forgive everyone who has ever hurt you in any way for anything. Just let it go. Now, some people say, well, I can't forgive that person because what a terrible thing they did to me. Remember this, that forgiveness is perfectly selfish. Forgiveness has nothing whatever to do with the other person. It has only to do with your peace of mind and with your assuring your own mental integrity. Number 3, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself for every wicked, senseless, brainless, foolish, stupid thing you ever did. Because every single person has done wicked, senseless, brainless, foolish, ridiculous things. But forgive yourself 100%. And finally, the last part of this is if you have done something to hurt someone else, go and apologize. It's amazing how many lives are ruined year after year by people who do not have the intestinal fortitude, the guts, the courage to go and say, I'm sorry. One of the most important things in life is to develop character. We develop character to the degree to which we do things which are hard for us, the degree to which we do things which we know are right, even though they're difficult, and especially when they're difficult emotionally. And the key to getting rid of guilt, the key to being a totally, fully functioning person is to forgive others. Forgive people that you've been in relationships with. Forgive previous employers. Forgive friends who've hurt you. Forgive investments that went wrong. Forgive bosses that fired you. Forgive your parents. Forgive everybody. Develop an attitude toward life that you refuse to hold a grudge against anybody. Just repeat over and over again, I forgive him or her for everything. I forgive him or her for everything. I forgive them for everything. And let it go. The key to freeing yourself from negative emotions is to absolutely refuse to carry any negativity forward. Remember, it's a perfectly selfish act. You can be as selfish as you want. The act of forgiveness frees you and liberates the other person and guarantees that you will move rapidly toward the fulfillment of your potential.
Session 8, The Worry Buster.
One of the great aims of life is to achieve your own peace of mind. And the reason why so few people have peace of mind is because they don't set it as an important enough goal. And if they do, they don't take the time to understand what stands between them and peace of mind. Now, we talked earlier about one of the major obstacles or major pairs of obstacles are negative habit patterns, the fear of failure, the fear of rejection. Those rob us of an enormous amount of peace of mind. We also talked about feelings of guilt, feelings of inadequacy, feelings of worthlessness, feelings of undeservingness, and so on. They also rob us of peace of mind. And I want to talk in this session about the last, if you like, key to this discussion on negative emotions, what we call negative imagination. Now, the word negative imagination comes from an extensive body of literature that was written at the beginning of the century, but they found that negative imagination is something that we create in ourselves that causes us an enormous amount of stress and distress, if you like. Negative imagination creates fear. And one of the best definitions of fear that I've seen lately is what is called fantasized experiences appearing real. Fantasized experiences appearing real. In other words, these are experiences which we create in our minds and our imaginations, and we dwell upon them, and the more we dwell upon them, the more real they become to us. It's like I have 3 little children, and if I let them watch a scary movie, even if they insist upon it, they begin to feel that there are scary creatures under their beds and in their cupboards and so on, is these fantasized experiences become real. And at one time, with little Michael, we couldn't get him to sleep in his bedroom at all because he was convinced that there were monsters in there. What do we call negative imagination? Well, another word for it is worry. Worry is a sustained form of fear caused by indecision. Worry is a sustained form of fear caused by indecision. Now, what does that mean? It means that when we make decisions, we do away with worry. A study was done some years ago where many thousands of people were surveyed and asked what were they worrying about at the current time. And they accumulated it all up and they found this is what people worry about. 40% of the worries that people had were things that never happened. When they went back later, they found that the things they were worried about would never happen. They were going to be late, or they'd lose a job, or they wouldn't work out on a date or a relationship. The next figure, 30%, were things that were in the past, that had already happened, that nothing could be done about. There were 12% of worries were worries about health. In most cases, needless worries. The thought that they had a pain or an illness or an ailment or something else that didn't turn out to be true. 10% of the things people worried about were petty worries. They were worried about whether or not they had enough change in the parking meter, whether or not someone would phone them. Really irrelevant worries. Only 8% of the worries were about anything substantial at all, and of those 8%, half, or 4%, were totally outside the control of the person. They were worried about whether Red China would invade northern Vietnam and things like that. I think the things that the person could have nothing to do about anyway. So basically the research shows that as much as 96% of everything that we worry about or more is irrelevant. It never happens. It's not worth worrying about at all. But where does worry come from? Well, worry comes from a worry mentality. As a matter of fact, if you were brought up in a family where your mother or father was a worrier, they worried all the time, then you're probably a worrier too. It's a conditioned response. You saw them worrying, you want to be like your mommy and daddy because they're the most important people in your world, so you worry too. And I've seen little kids 4 and 5 years old that are really good, accomplished worriers, and they and their parents will sit together and worry, even though there's nothing involved. But it's fantasized experiences appearing real. Our job is to eliminate worry, and I'd like to give you 2 or 3 simple ideas that you can use. Number 1, which is one of the most popular of all, is just simply this. It's live one day at a time. Live one day at a time. Is don't worry about what might happen tomorrow. Don't worry about what may happen a year from now or 6 months from now. Just do the very best you can right now. There's a beautiful line from Teddy Roosevelt. He said something to the effect that do what you can where you are with what you have and don't worry about the rest. Do what you can where you are with what you have and don't worry about the rest. Live one day at a time. Just worry about getting through today and taking care of today. And as the Bible says, let the morrow take care of itself. Sufficient unto the day are the cares thereof. Number 2 key to dealing with worry, and I have an enormous number of challenges that I face in my business life, is get the facts. This is so important. Get the facts. Not the apparent facts, not the quick facts, not the facts that seem obvious, but get the real facts. Take the time to look into a situation and find out what the real truth of the matter is. I have found that most worry situations evaporate if you get enough facts. You hear that somebody has done something or not done something. You hear about a change in your business or your personal life or change in one of your relationships. Find out. Call the person. Find from the right information source the answer, and you'll often find that the facts eliminate the worry. Most people who worry are people who would much rather worry than take the time to ask and find out what exactly is going on. Ask people, do your research, do your reading, do your homework, get the facts. One of the most important requirements, by the way, for your success in business or any other thing, any other field of endeavor, is to get the facts that you need so that your answers are accurate and up to date. Now, the third method is what I call the worry buster. The worry buster is a word or an expression that came from one of our graduates. He said this expression literally saved his business and saved his mental health. It's one of the simplest of all techniques, and it is just dynamite. It consists of 4 steps. All right, step number 1 is when you have something on your mind, define it clearly in writing. Define it clearly in writing. Sit down, take the time to write it out, and say, what exactly is it that I'm worried about? And sit down and write it out. I am worried about this, and describe the situation exactly the way you see it. In medicine, they say that accurate diagnosis is 50% of the cure. Accurate diagnosis, defining it clearly in writing, is 50% of the cure. Now, an important point here is sometimes when you have what seems to be an overwhelming problem, you have more than one problem. You have what is called a cluster situation, where you have 2 or 3 or 4 problems all together. If you define it clearly in writing, sometimes you can write it out, 1, 2, 3, 4, that there are several little problems that are all together that are worrying you, and sometimes if you eliminate one of those difficulties, the rest of them evaporate. Sometimes one problem in a cluster of problems is the key, and all the others become irrelevant. So be alert to that, but define it clearly in writing. Number 2 is once you define it clearly, this is the key. Determine the worst possible outcome. Determine the worst possible outcome. In other words, ask yourself, what is the worst possible thing that could happen as a result of this situation? Left to itself, if the worst happened, what would it be? Determine the worst possible outcome. Now, an interesting thing happens here. We find that in worry, we are not worried or stressed by the event. An event does not trouble us. What troubles us is anticipation of an event, and the resistance that we put up psychologically, wishing, hoping, praying that it doesn't take place. If psychologically we determine the worst possible outcome in writing, and you say the worst possible thing that can happen is this, and we make it concrete and we put it down on paper, you will find a remarkable thing. Your worries disappear. They just seem to evaporate as soon as we define the worst possible outcome. The stress comes from not wanting to face what it could be. We talk about this later, but it's the psychological phenomenon of denial. We deny, we don't want to put off. For instance, you have an investment, and the investment is getting worse and worse. So you have to say to yourself, what's the worst thing that can happen with this investment? And the worst thing is that you lose it all. Once you say, I lose it all, suddenly you're not so worried about it anymore, because, it just may happen. The third step, or let me go back a second, with regard to a relationship. Sometimes we're in a relationship that's very unhappy, and we say, well, what's the worst thing that can happen here? The worst thing that can happen here is that you lose the relationship. The relationship disappears. Then you have to ask yourself, will that kill me? Will the loss of the investment kill me? Will the loss of the job kill me? Will the loss of the relationship kill me? And the answer, of course, is no. You will recover from the loss of almost anything. So number 3, by the way, there are many people who get and have the signs of cancer, but they won't go to a doctor because they don't want to know. The stress of not knowing actually exacerbates the course of the disease, and finally when they do have to go to a doctor, it's gone so far the doctor can't save them. But the stress of not facing the possibility keeps them away from a doctor long past the point where a doctor could help them. Number 3 is resolve to accept the worst should it occur. Resolve to accept the worst should it occur. This is not passive, and this is not fatalistic. Just say, if nothing could be done, and this were to happen, I will accept it. I have a saying which I use that is, what cannot be cured must be endured. What cannot be cured must be endured. So you say, well, all right, if this happens, I'll accept it, and I'll learn to live with it. I'm not going to let it break me. I'm not going to let it kill me. And then number 4 is begin immediately to improve upon the worst. Begin immediately to improve upon the worst. What does that mean? It means you've now accepted that it might happen, and you've now decided that you will live with it should it occur, and now you do everything you possibly can to work back and make sure that the worst doesn't occur. In business, by the way, this is called the minimax regret analysis. It's minimizing the maximum regret. In other words, it's saying, what is the worst thing that can happen and how can I minimize that maximum regret? This Minimax technique is a tremendous technique because it clears your mind considerably. And one of the best ways to use it is this. Really neat method. Take a piece of paper, draw a line down the center and a line across the top, and then work down the page. And right on this side, write WPO. Right on this page, your definition. In other words, this is a clear definition of what's bothering you. On the top of this page, you write WPO, worst possible outcome. And then you write 1, and you say, I'm worried about this. And you write it out clearly. And then you write 1, you say the worst possible outcome is this. 2, I'm worried about this. 2, worst possible outcome is this. And so on. You'll find that every single time you do this, the problem just evaporates. And most, not all of course, but most of the stress or strain disappears. Your mind goes clear, and with a clear mind, you can then deal with it effectively. Now, the final point with regard to this whole idea of worry and negative imagination is, what is the antidote? What is the antidote to worry? What do you think it is? Well, it's simply this. It is purposeful action. The only real antidote to worry is purposeful action. Everything that gets you to the point where you can take purposeful action, where you can move, and as Shakespeare says, take arms against the sea of troubles, and by so doing end them, anything that gets you to the point where you can take purposeful action will eliminate the worry. Why? Because of what we call the law of substitution. You cannot be working on a problem or a situation and thinking and acting purposefully to resolve it and still worry about it simultaneously. Worry almost always comes when you have too much time on your hands. Worry is a form of negative goal setting. Remember we talked about the law of concentration? It says whatever you dwell upon grows. Well, whenever you have a worry situation, what do you find yourself doing? What you find yourself doing is thinking about, talking about, dwelling upon, vividly imagining exactly what you don't want. By the law of expectations, is whatever you expect will come into your life. That which I greatly feared has come upon me, is what it says in the book of Job. Or the law of attraction says, you will attract into your life the people and circumstances in harmony with your dominant thoughts. The reason why we're taking a whole module to talk about worry is this, is that there are some people who don't worry about anything. This method, by the way, of determining the worst possible outcome, the worry buster, is also a tremendous method for decision making. When you go into any situation where you have to make a decision one way or another, the first question you should sit and ask, once you've analyzed it, is what's the worst thing that can happen? I remember the great J. Paul Getty, who at one time was one of the richest men in the world, said that this method of determining the worst possible downside was used by him as a decision-making method into every business deal he went to. What he would do is he would say, no, what's the worst thing that can happen? And then he would make sure that the worst didn't happen. So make the decision right now that you're going to eliminate worry, fantasized experiences appearing real, that you're going to accept the worst possible outcome should it occur, and now get busy, do everything humanly possible to take constructive action to eliminate the worry situation and do away with it. That's the key to eliminating the final of the worst of our negative emotions.
This is the end of Side 2. Please fast forward the tape to the end to cue up Side 1 for your next listening.